the invisible threat. For 2 years, Stephen Purod lived in silent fear, unable to understand why his neighbor, Stephen Groves, had turned his back on him. Purod, a disabled man who relied on the help of a caregiver and the safety of his home, found himself the target of relentless harassment. It started out subtle. A glare here, a muttered insult there, but soon escalated into something much more sinister. Purod had installed a Ring doorbell camera to help him monitor visitors. Little did he know, the device would become a battleground. The footage it captured was chilling. In one clip, Groves is seen approaching the camera with a screwdriver, trying to cut the wire. When that didn't work, he tried to scribble on the lens with a marker, but the ink wouldn't stick. Frustrated, Groves resorted to violence, hitting the device with a hammer, then a broomstick in a futile attempt to silence it. Despite the clear evidence, the reason behind Groves' attacks remained a mystery. Over the next 6 months, Groves was convicted of harassment 3 times and ordered to pay damages. He was placed on a curfew and electronically tagged, but none of these measures deterred him. The restraining order meant nothing to him. He continued his campaign of terror with impunity. Purod's niece, who often visited to care for him, was terrified. The sight of Groves' uncontrolled actions haunted her. She could not shake the feeling that Groves' rage was growing, that one day he might transfer his violence from the camera to her uncle. The police did everything they could, but it was not enough. The court had ruled, but Groves was still free to stalk and threaten. Every night, Purod and his niece locked their windows and doors, praying that this would be enough. But as they lay awake, listening for any sound of Groves approaching, they knew that the flimsy walls of their home could not protect them from the madness lurking. They knew that the darkness in Groves' mind could escalate from smashing cameras to shattering bones. And so they waited, trapped in their own home, fearful of what the next day might bring. Story 2. A Knock at Midnight. The knock came at a quiet hour of the night. The homeowner, a naturally cautious man, had installed a Ring camera to monitor who came near his door, especially at night. But tonight, he made a mistake he would come to regret. 2 hooded figures stood at the door, their faces hidden in the shadows. One of them, a woman, spoke first, her voice shaky and desperate. "Hello, do you have a phone I can use? My car's broken down and your house is the only place with lights on." The homeowner hesitated. He knew better than to open the door to strangers at this hour, especially those who looked like this. But something in the woman's voice urged him on, and against his better judgment, he turned the lock. As the door opened, a second figure, a man in a yellow hoodie and a mask, rushed forward. In his hand was a gun, glinting in the dim light. The homeowner's heart nearly stopped as he realized his mistake. But instinct took over, and he slammed the door shut, using his strength to fight it off just in time. The man in the hoodie pounded on the door, angry at being stopped, but the homeowner remained resolute. outside. The robbers exchanged glances, then fled into the night. The homeowner stood frozen behind the door, breathing heavily, panicked. He had almost let danger into his home. The Ring camera, which had recorded the entire incident, now seemed like a light. The footage would show the police exactly what had happened. But the homeowner knew it was luck, not technology, that had saved him. For days afterward, he couldn't shake the image of the masked man with the gun. The way he moved so fast, so deliberately. He had almost become a victim, a statistic, and the thought chilled him to the bone. From that night on, he vowed never to open the door without checking the camera first. But the fear remained, a constant reminder of how close he had come to disaster. Story 3. The Man at the Door. Jojo Ramirez had just gotten her son ready for bed when she heard someone at the door. It was late, and they weren't expecting anyone. A chill ran down her spine as she glanced at the Ring camera's live feed. There, standing just outside, was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, his face expressionless, his eyes staring straight ahead. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there waiting. Jojo's heart pounded in her chest as she whispered for her son to back away. She slowly backed away from the door, her hands shaking as she reached for the lock. Sure, but she wasn't going to risk it. There's a guy outside, she told her son, trying to stay calm. Stay away from the door. She locked the door and backed away, her eyes never leaving the screen. The man finally took a step back, but he didn't leave. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the door before finally turning and walking away into the night. Jojo watched him go, her hands shaking. She'd locked the door just in time, but the fear didn't leave her. She couldn't stop thinking about how close they'd come for that man to get in, how vulnerable they'd been. She didn't sleep at all that night, her mind racing with the possibilities that could happen if she didn't act too quickly. Story 4. The Rooftop Creepers. It was a cold night in the Netherlands, and the homeowner had just gone to bed. The silence of the night was comforting, lulling him to sleep. But as he drifted off, he heard something faint but unmistakable, a noise coming from above. He sat up in bed, straining his ears. It could be animals, he thought, or it could just be the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too intentional. It was footsteps, someone moving on the roof. His heart pounded as he realized someone was on his property, trespassing in the middle of the night. The next morning, after a restless night, he checked the notifications from his Ring doorbell. What he saw made him shiver. The footage showed 3, maybe 4 young men lurking around his house. Two of them had climbed onto the roof, while the others stood below, whispering to someone out of sight. The men moved with quiet determination, their eyes scanning the house for any sign of life. The homeowner quickly realized they had tried to break in. Scratches on 2 upstairs windows confirmed it. They had tried to pry them open. The only thing stopping them was the cold. All the windows were tightly closed against the cold. He couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. These men had come at night, silently with the intention of robbing him, or worse. He could only imagine what might happen if they got inside. The thought made his skin crawl. He reported the incident to the police, turning in the footage in the hopes that they could identify the intruders. But the fear remained. A few nights later, he woke to the sound of someone trying to open a downstairs window. This time, the intruders weren't caught on camera, but the homeowner knew they were there. He lived in fear that they would return, waiting every night for footsteps on the roof, quiet whispers outside the window. Story 5. The Silent Gunman. It was the middle of the night when the neighbor's Ring camera flickered to life, activated by movement on the quiet suburban street. The neighborhood was usually peaceful at this hour, with most residents tucked safely into their beds, unaware of the world outside. But on this particular night, something was different. The streetlights cast long shadows that danced eerily in the cool night breeze, and the air was heavy with an unsettling stillness. The camera captured the image of a figure approaching from the darkness. He was young, his build slight but tense, as if every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to spring into action. His face was obscured by a mask, a simple cloth that covered his features, leaving only his eyes visible, cold, determined, and unreadable. In his hand, he clutched a gun, the metal gleaming faintly under the streetlight. The figure moved with deliberate slowness, his footsteps almost soundless on the pavement. He approached the front door of a house that stood in the center of the camera's frame, its occupants blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just outside. The young man stopped a few feet away from the door, staring at it as if weighing his options. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, unmoving. He didn't knock, didn't try the doorknob, didn't make a sound. Instead, he simply stood, the gun hanging loosely by his side, as if lost in thought. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick, suffocating feeling that seemed to radiate from the screen. The Ring camera captured every agonizing second, recording the subtle shifts in the young man's posture, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the anxious glance he cast over his shoulder every few moments. His eyes darted around, scanning the quiet street, the neighboring houses, as if searching for something, perhaps a reason to proceed or maybe a reason to turn back. But what was he waiting for? What had brought him to this house, in the middle of the night, with a gun in his hand and a mask over his face? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying in their implications. As the minutes ticked by, the young man's indecision became more apparent. His grip on the gun tightened, then loosened, as if he were wrestling with some internal battle. He took a small step forward, then hesitated, his hand inching toward the doorknob before pulling back. He turned his head slightly, listening to the silence around him, the stillness of the night pressing in from all sides. Then something changed. Perhaps it was the sudden awareness of the camera's unblinking eye, or maybe the realization that he was exposed, vulnerable in this quiet neighborhood where any sound could bring unwanted attention. Whatever it was, it caused the young man to falter. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he began to back away from the door. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if he feared making any sudden noise that might attract notice. He took one last, lingering look at the house, at the door he had come so close to breaching, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows from which he had emerged. The camera continued recording for several more minutes, capturing nothing but the empty street, the faint rustling of leaves in the wind, and the distant hum of crickets. The house remained still, its occupants unaware of how close they had come to a potential nightmare. It wasn't until the next morning that the footage was discovered. The neighbor who owned the Ring camera was performing his usual routine, checking the overnight recordings for any unusual activity. At first, he thought it was just another false alarm. Perhaps a stray cat or a passing car had triggered the motion sensor. But as he scrolled through the footage, his breath caught in his throat. There, in stark black and white, was the image of the masked man, gun in hand, standing at his front door in the dead of night. The homeowner's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold, the terror of what could have happened sinking in. The footage was clear and unmistakable. This man had come with a purpose, and it was only by some unknown force that he had been stopped. Panic set in as the homeowner replayed the video, analyzing every detail. Who was this man? Why had he brought a gun to their door? The possibilities ran wild in his mind, each one more horrifying than the last. Was he planning a robbery? A home invasion, or something far worse? The fact that they had been spared felt like a narrow escape, but the fear that gripped the homeowner was real and lingering. The footage was immediately turned over to the police, who promised to investigate, but their reassurances did little to calm the homeowner's nerves. The questions continued to plague him, especially the most pressing one. What had stopped the man from going through with his plan? Was it fear, second thoughts, or had something or someone intervened at the last? Days passed, and the neighborhood returned to its usual routine, but the sense of unease remained. The silence of the night, once comforting, now felt like a threat, a cover for the danger that had lurked just outside their doors. Every creak, every rustle, every shadow seemed menacing, as if the masked man might return at any moment to finish what he had started. The Ring camera, which had once been a simple security measure, now served as a constant reminder of that terrifying night. The homeowner found himself checking the footage obsessively, every night before bed and every morning upon waking, searching for any sign that the man had returned. But the camera remained silent. capturing nothing but the mundane comings and goings of daily life. Yet the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of the homeowner's mind. The knowledge that someone had come so close to invading their home that they had stood on the brink of something terrible was a weight that wouldn't lift. The neighborhood, with its manicured lawns and quiet streets, no longer felt safe. It was as if the masked man had shattered the illusion of security, revealing the darkness that could so easily creep in. And so the homeowner waited, always on edge, knowing that the silent gunman was out there somewhere. A ghost in the night, a reminder that safety is never guaranteed, and that sometimes the greatest threats are the ones you never see coming.